Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists absolutely got it correct. And more so, I want to take and apologize for last week. I know that at Liberty Works Radio Network, we did a rerun, and I have to apologize to my friends down there in Lima, Ohio, in not getting something down to you. But you know what? My staff, that being me, just ran into a number of different walls and interesting things last week. So with that, we are back, and I am excited to talk to you about this week's program. This week's program, we're talking about the good life of disastrous utopianism. Once again, that is in the design of the administrative state. I was trying to find this article by what's his name? Victor Davis Hanson. And he had something to say about that in the modern environment, if you will, kind of around the administrative state. And so hopefully, as this goes into full production, that I will have that for you there in the notes at samueladamsreturns.com, or actually .net. You can go to samueladamsreturns.com and you can see all the stuff that I do. But samueladamsreturns.net, again, over my shoulder for those that are watching the video, you can get all of the reruns. But when we take and we look at our present and we see what's going on with the administrative state, we see how evil it is, we see all of the confusion that it causes, we see the oligarchs that are out there, the BlackRocks, the Bill Gates, the on, the Soros son, so on and so forth. You know, those of us that try to approach things from a constitutional perspective always say, well, they're this, they're that. Whatever label that you put on them, that's what they are in your parlay. But the fact is that it's nothing new. As I will always say, you go back to Ecclesiastes, and there's nothing new under the sun. And I guess the greatest frustration for me is that we don't want to know the history, and therefore we think that what the modern generation is saying or writing or anything like that, oh, that's a new revelation. It's a new revelation. And we need to blah, 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 blah. The fact of the matter is we have ignored what has been written, and we have not applied what has been told to us to be aware of, to take and fight against, to fight for. And with that, as I always say, we've seen the transition in the pulpits. Now, a couple weeks ago, I did put up a survey from Pew Research in relationship to just what was going on with environmentalism and how many Christians, it's no big deal because we know that God is in control and we're supposed to be good stewards of the earth. But no different than we see in all of the evils around gender, we see the evils of environmentalism as part of that utopianism, as well as a religion. Now, I've done programs on the religion of environmentalism, and there's been a lot of that that's been around now for the last, year, maybe 2 years. But the facts are that we're seeing so-called Christian churches that have subscribed to this new religion and therefore are supporting it. And I even brought out how it is with the Mennonites subscribing to this religion of environmentalism. And then so many other major denominations that have become the gender benders, which is totally evil. So I start the newsletter out for those that have not gone to read it with a quote from the book on the administrative state. Their good society is strikingly like a world of tomorrow, futurama, or a Megapolis, a 50-year plan in the scale model. It is, of course, a mechanical civilization. I must stop during this. You see that we're a mechanical civilization? For it is the machine that has enabled man to lift himself above his environment and to extend the blessings of civilization to all the members of society for the first time in history. It is quite obviously a planned society. So we have a couple things that are going on, and we can wrap into this very easily, is that on the new artificial intelligence trend. And what does that mean? That's part of the machine. I mean, go back to years ago when I was a key speaker at a technology conference, and I used at that time a movie as a basis for becoming part of the machine. You can go back and look up what movie that is. You should be able to recognize where all humanity becomes just battery cells to power the machine. So it then now comes to the 15-minute city, the planned society. So what we have is such magnificent zoning, for example, would require great imagination and conception, and through effort and strict obedience and execution. All we can tell about the form of government must follow from the obvious fact of the planning. It may be democratic, but the range of government control is unquestionably large and the machinery of administration extensive. It is very probably a collectivist society so far as it uses a means is concerned. So this is from the section in the Administrative State, a Study of Political Theory of American Public Administration from page 66. And when we look at what is going on in our society now, we hear all of the Democrats crying out that Trump and all of us that are constitutionalists are destroying democracy. Well, you know on this program quite clearly, we are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. But the planners who have developed and brought us through all of this technocracy to the point now that government is a machine, and this machine is continuum on its own. It's now become, through the bureaucratic state, a continuum of its own that, it functions within those that are in that parallel universe of governance, the oligarchs. It's a collective society for them. And the rest of us then are put into our little pods so that we can take and energize the machine. I'm going to take you to a last quote that I will reference for you here. And you have to go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net to find it. And it's at the end where what's going on in this particular section and what has been described as we're seeing utopianism, the curtain being pulled back, if you will, from around the wizards of Oz. And it's not the little Frodo doggy that's pulling it back. It's good reason. It's that understanding. And more importantly, what I'm finding is it's actually some of the pulpits that are out there that are preaching gospel truth and liberty, and what that means, as I have talked to you about in the sermon that I am still, in time that is fairly allotted to me, still taking and working in modernizing this sermon that we have. I've looked at it a lot as God's sovereign government among the nations. God's sovereign government among the nations. We forget that he is totally, absolutely sovereign. Until we ultimately recognize that, even in a non-Christian society, leaders have to recognize that sovereignty, we're going to have the mess that we have. So let me go through this particular paragraph as the oligarchs, and we've seen Bill Gates now is changing his tune on how he describes the global warming and his environmentalism. We have the oligarchs at BlackRock changing their tune about ESG and so on. So we're looking at the wizards of utopianism beginning to really switch up so that they can continue new mantras in an effort to keep the masses dazed and enslaved. So let's go with this in these last few minutes, is that what's going on is not necessarily communism. Pay close attention to this, because this is what is stated in the book on the administrative state. Perhaps a word should be said on the consistency of this New Deal attitude with the general acceptance of business by public administration. It is very significant that administrative writers do not generally feel any inconsistency in holding both to the idea of an extended sphere of government influence and operation. I have to stop you there, and we may carry this over in reading this into this second segment. But let's stop here, because if we go back to the days of Ross Perot and the general public, even today, and probably more so today than ever before, saying, government should be run like a business. If we ran government like a business, we wouldn't have all these problems. If government could only manage their budgets and everything like a business. Here we have the bureaucratic state saying there's no inconsistencies in holding the idea of a sphere of government influence and operation to the ideals of a business civilization. The two together. Ross Perot was that first business guy that was going to come in and apply all these business principles. But as I take you into it, you're going to have to come back into the second segment to understand this so-called hint of, but it's not there. It's not a hint of socialism, of any type of doctrinaire of socialism, as you'll hear about in the next segment. No, what you have is that we're operating in essence in the forms of the machine, of the mechanisms that move in context of government, and the perversions of the business mechanism coming together. Not fashionism, as one would think when government and business come together, like under Mussolini or Hitler. No. What this is a well thought out governmental machine that has been going on since back in 19 12. Come on back for the rest of it in the next segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. And yes, this is Tom Novolis, your host. I did forget to introduce myself. That's one of my staffing problems that I have with this organization, is that they forget to put up what I'm supposed to say on the reader board out there. Wait a minute. I'm going to have to take a look at that staffing problem. Anyway, that's me. But let's get back to this whole idea that what we're experiencing now is not necessarily communism as much as it is that marriage, a business civilization within the context of government. The new understanding of what is the purpose of government. So let me read to you, and I'll interject again, as I always do, this paragraph out of our source book. And this is the manipulation by the oligarchs that they were raised up in and taught within the university system, especially those that were specifically groomed into what we're experiencing today. So the quote goes like this: "Perhaps a word should be said on the consistency of this New Deal attitude." Remember, the New Deal under Franklin Roosevelt was that merger of business and government. And it was done quite well. And many business people were excited about it. They wanted it. Think about large businesses today. They want it. Thinking about the automobile strike, the unions that are out on strike because now government is pushing the whole EV insanity, and the auto manufacturers are jumping on that and accepting it. So here we have that acceptance of business by public administration. The bureaucrats love it. In fact, the bureaucrats, EPA, all of these different entities in the bureaucracy, in the administrative state, are pushing it. It is very significant that administrative writers do not generally feel any inconsistency in holding both to the idea of an extended sphere of government influence and operation, and to the ideals of a business civilization. In this, no doubt, they are what the Marxists call bourgeoisies. So this isn't Marxism, okay? This, what we are living in, is not Marxism. This is that business, civilization, government influence, and operation in the administrative state. So now we continue. There is not a hint of doctrinal or doctrinae socialism in all the literature of public administration. Isn't that amazing? So, I have been guilty of calling this socialism, communism, when in fact, in everything to do with the administrative state, that's not in the books. Many of the instructors are, without question, but that's not the language. That's not the words. So we go on. The leaders of the early research movement were, I'd call for a drum roll, but this is disgusting. All the early leaders, the researchers of this movement to promote the administrative state were business people. Business people pushed for the administrative state. Far from thinking in terms of a conflict between government and business, they thought of their work as an extension of business to government. Hello, Ross Perot. Hello, the American public in the 70s and 80s calling for business modeling in government. Wow. They thought, as most of their successors have thought, and then brings it right to today, that the tuning up, and it's in quotes in the book, tuning up of governmental machinery and its more vigorous operation will be inconsistent with the maximum operation of all legitimate business enterprises. So you want to tune up the government machine and make it more vigorous. And it will not be inconsistent, will not be inconsistent with the maximum operation of all legitimate business enterprises. So the large businesses want this. Look at all the lobbyists that are out there. Look at what we're seeing just in the Mendez case right now. Gold bar, Mendez, and how it's coming out, how he became the slush fund for the distribution to just about every Democrat out there into their campaigns through his PAC. Isn't that interesting? How then this legitimizes these large businesses. Oh, and the one on Adam Schiff. If you look at what's out there in the news right now on Adam Schiff and how he did, what did they call that? Pork-barreled money into all the defense contractors in his area, and the thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars were given to the defense contractors in his area for 10, 20, 7,000, 5,000, all these thousands of dollars of campaign contributions. Yeah. So what we have is the large business enterprises want this. So the destruction of small businesses in America, and small businesses is defined as basically, 5,000 employees or less, and it all is based on then what their annual revenues are as well. But when we take and we look at all of the businesses that were destroyed by COVID, and we look at what else is going on, we're seeing that the maximum operation of all legitimate businesses is not inconsistent with the governmental machinery that's out there. After all, it's only a step from this point of view to the opinion that, quote, the purpose of the democratic state necessitates the development of a great administrative machine. Thus, paradoxical as it may seem to the Jeffersonian Democrats, the liberal democratic state must be sustained by a huge bureaucracy. As I was going through this in the book and having to bring this out in relationship to the utopianism that this great democratic state, this great administrative machine, the necessity of it, a democratic state. For the democracy to be that parallel, operational, functional government, the bureaucratic state, for it to exist, that great administrative machine needs to be there to sustain then everything that we see with these large, maximum operating, legitimate business enterprises bring. The wealth distribution, they don't care. So when you have all of our national oligarchs, just here in America alone, you can go find the list of billionaires and millionaires in America, and you will see that they have fully legitimate business enterprises that are supported by the governmental machine. In fact, it enhances them. Just think about that. Here it used to be decades and decades ago that most government computer systems and all of that were always maintained in-house for various security reasons, so on and so forth. Now, most data center activities are outsourced to Amazon, are outsourced to Google, are outsourced to these legitimate business enterprises. I was talking to a friend of mine that lives out in the D.C. area, came to visit, and he was saying you wouldn't believe the data centers that are going up in and around his area within 20 miles, 25 miles of Washington, D.C. Data centers are exploding, and they're not owned by the government. They're owned by these private entities. More and more of our government is what? Tied in with this governmental machinery in a vigorous operation. As I continue to look at the good life is what we want, the good life is what everybody has been looking for since World War II in particular. It was a move towards that utopianism. It was that move towards, the gender neutral, the just that and the everything. And yet, we have all of the diseases of humanity that are upon us. So we can take and look at, take into account some real-time planning by an obvious socialist communist regime, that being of California, and maybe it's not socialist communist. Maybe it is just the good planning of the administrative state there. California Democrats, legislators, vote to ban grass laws. So in California now, you're not allowed to have any grass in those governmental areas, in the medians on roads, in front of government buildings, in front of any public, maybe in front of schools, in front of any public area. And they're calling it on the purely decorative grass because it's going to save water. Non-functional turf we'll get rid of. So we have this utopianism, we have this administrative state that is now legislating, and the machine of government is acting on that. We have another quote here from our book, our reference book. The fact of planning indicates that what some people once regard as their liberties have been curtailed, but that liberty has been given the substantive content: work, food, clothing, shelter, leisure, that others claimed for it. There's your 15-minute city. We'll take care of you. We will take care of you. We will plan so that you're taken care of within this little 15-minute parameter. And don't worry about going outside of that. We'll create the matrix. We'll create the matrix. And only those who are special can ever really move outside of that good life. Wait a minute. Is that a good life? I don't think so. I think we have a lot to really take a hard look at when we try and understand this, because Sam Adams and our founders fought against exactly that. Come on back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, yes, they did. They nailed it right on the head. This is Tom Navulis, your host. Don't know if you knew that or not, but I thought I'd say it just as, a kind reminder to you. Have a little fun with it as we look at the good life, and utopianism and what it means to be controlled by the central planners. So I wanted to look at now, is the good life falling apart? What type of conundrum do we have going on? So the idolatry, and that it is of what? Work, food, clothing, shelter, leisure in particular, is given to you, whether you live in a 15-minute city or not, if you understand what the bureaucratic state is doing. But maybe we're seeing some people waking up against this utopianism. I don't think that the leadership of the United Auto Workers is, because they're refusing to meet with Trump as he met this past week here. But, the rank and file, pretty excited about that, because when they had Brain Dead Joe show up, there was the basic clapping and all of that, but the guy was brain dead. The man is definitely has issues. But the point of it is that this utopianism on this good society, demanding clean streets, looking at what is it for your gardens, your health, your EVs. When I was reading to you earlier about it takes away your liberties. So how is it that the government now, in conjunction with the auto workers, well, I shouldn't say the auto workers so much, because they're saying they want their money. They want better wages, and to some extent, they don't want EVs brought in, because the majority of that is all coming from China, as we well know. So now the government has that relationship with China to bring in the batteries, because the battery plant that was being produced here in America was shut down for whatever reason. You can go research that. But what it comes down to is that who can tell you how you travel? Who can tell you what mechanism of transportation you can have? I mean, look at it. They don't even want you to have a horse. Everybody's got to go to a electric vehicle, an EV. Dangerous as they are. There's an article that I have for you in the list of articles, is where in England and elsewhere, they're now saying that the EVs are extremely dangerous, not just because they can catch on fire for a lot of various reasons, but because of their weight. They weigh on average 2,000 pounds more than gasoline vehicles. And that when you start parking a bunch of EVs in a parking garage, the potential is for the parking garage to collapse. There's a safety issue just on parking because there's no infrastructure for that design. The designs are for gasoline vehicles. See how crazy that is? And yet you have the government in conjunction with big businesses that want to tell you what you can drive, tell you how far you can go, because you figure they're never going to put in a sufficient infrastructure for you to be able to travel across the country. You're going to be scrambling. And then if you go outside of your region, then you'll be paying a premium to be able to plug in to go from coast to coast, from border to border. Interesting. And you're going to get taxed more on a road tax because remember, hey, think about this one really hard right now, is that electric vehicles don't use fossil fuels, so your gas tax goes away. Look at the gas tax in your particular state, in your particular region, because remember, some counties have those taxes associated in the sales tax components. So when you start looking at that all going away, your other taxes, you'll be taxed by the mile, will go up. You have to pay for your roads somehow. You have to pay for that extra 2,000 pounds that your vehicle is going to weigh for road damage. Oh, okay. But you know what? We're going to have the clean streets. We're going to have the cleaner air as they suck the carbon dioxide out of it and kill the trees that are the natural carbon dioxide to oxygen generators. So now your garden-like cities, with all the spacious parking and fine civic buildings, is the polar opposite of what is being accepted and what's happening with all the illegal aliens going into these various cities. They're not migrants. As you well know, anybody that's on the networks that we listen to or you're listening to, these are not migrants. They're illegals that are crashing our border. They're criminals. All the way down to the kids are criminals for what they're doing. So when we look at all the various articles that I have there for you, that we're seeing that utopianism isn't what it's cut out to be. That utopianism here is defined within the context of the Declaration of Independence as violations in the charges that were put together against none other than King George. And you're probably scratching your head at that one and going, Tom, where in the world do you get that? How in the world do you look at those charges of the Declaration of Independence? Well, I'm going to ask you to go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net and in the newsletter for today, great analysis on the Declaration of Independence, as well as how those charges are listed out. Most people never get into that aspect of the Declaration of Independence and know what was specifically charged against the king. But when we take and we look at articles that are embedded in there like Biden, U.S. must accelerate climate crisis, announces a new climate army. You see, this is what King George, we declared against him as violations of bringing troops into the colonies for reasons that violated then what they called the English Constitution. No different than now, this 20,000 new troops that will be used to accelerate the climate crisis. Go after you and I because of various reasons. We don't agree with the climate insanity. Read the link. It's there. But it's a violation, again, no different than the violation of King George, charges 11 and 12. So go read that. The link is there at SamuelAdamsReturns.net. So we do. We always have these parallels in history. So we're going to take a quick look in this section of The Administrative State, that book. The Anti-Federalists predicted it. I've talked to you about this over and over. Brutus predicted it. Others predicted it. And here's a quick look at the subheading of the chapter on the good life. You want the good life, right? That was always something that, especially, the baby boomers heard over and over about the good life. So here it is. the good life, the mastery of nature. Here's a quick bullets with each of these. Government and administration, properly conceived and scientifically developed, will make man master of his soul. Master of his soul? Well, that's the fundamental sin of mankind, is trying to be God. Master of his soul, master of your soul, is that you're doing exactly what Lucifer wanted to be, is elevate yourself above God. The master of our souls is supposed to be, should be, the living God from the Old and New Testament, Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, of all government, is under his footstool. All right, let's move on. A planned society. We're seeing that now, and really, how well does that work? How well are the planners doing? How well is all of the various regional planning really working? Another one, the extension of the public interest. And what that is almost without exception, they look favorably upon government, regard it as a desirable instrument for the accomplishment of individual and community processes. They profess indifference of express favor at proposals to extend the range of its operational control. So they're indifferent. They want government. There's indifference to it. We see that all the time in all these little agencies that are out there. If government isn't doing it, it can't get done. Don't you know that? Well, whatever happened to the volunteer agencies? Whatever happened to true Christian charity accomplishing various things within your community? That's just a couple quick, three little bullets there. So our present states and federal government, they're rife. They're full of it. They're full of key impacts that take and destroy a functioning republic. So we have this parallel constitutional democracy to that of a true constitutional republic, but the constitutional democracy, which is, as I read before, is more of a parliamentary democracy now. It's ruled by oligarchs, academics, and obviously all of the bureaucrats that come through these two aforementioned elements. Well, is the good life slipping? You know, there's that old song out there, slip sliding away. I don't know that it's fully slip sliding away, but one thing I have to say, there are many people in the flyover counties and states whose reasoning abilities are exceeding the need of being taken care of, even within the farming communities who have received so much bureaucratic funding. So there's a fragment, within these United States who have a sense of what real liberty means. And I have to say that a lot of it is that liberty is once again being preached in a number of different pulpits that are out there. It's being preached in the context of that sermon that I talked to you about earlier. So what do you need to do? What you need to do is understand that this has been talked about before. This is nothing new, and it was well planned. How do you get out of the matrix? Well, the movie says you take a red pill. But what does that mean? That means now is that you have to be active. You need to take and participate. And you have to do so as we did in the founding area. First from the pulpits. And then you have to see how that spills into action. That every hearer of truth, everyone listening to this program, has to be a doer without compromise and fear. Sam Adams understood that. So come on back next week when Sam Adams does return.